It's been over 3 years, and I still can't work alone at night. I used to laugh at people who were scared of empty buildings or dark office hallways. That changed after one night back in 2021. I was covering a late shift alone at the warehouse, something I'd done dozens of times before. But this time, someone else was inside with me, and I don't think they were supposed to be. I was 28 at the time, working night shifts at a distribution center just outside of Milwaukee. It was one of those warehouse jobs where you clock in, keep to yourself, and grind through 10 or 12 hours moving boxes, scanning shipments, and keeping the floor organized. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and I liked that it was quiet at night. No managers breathing down your neck, no coworkers chatting your ear off. Just me, my earbuds, and the hum of forklifts and conveyor belts. We usually had 2 or 3 people on during the night shift, but that particular Thursday, both of my coworkers had called out. One had the flu, the other had a family emergency. My supervisor texted me to see if I was okay, running the shift solo. It wasn't ideal, but I'd done it before, and the schedule was light. I agreed, figuring I'd knock out my list and be done by 5 a.m. Like always, I brought a big thermos of coffee and my Bluetooth speaker. I wasn't nervous at all. Not yet. I clocked in just after 7 p.m. The place was already quiet, that kind of silence you only get in buildings made of concrete and steel. Just echoes and the occasional mechanical creak from the loading dock doors settling. I went through the usual checklist, did a walk around, turned on a few lights, powered up the scanner, and started checking incoming pallets against the manifest. Everything was normal for the first couple of hours. The warehouse had a huge main floor and 4 loading docks in the back. It was mostly empty except for a few trailers that had been unloaded earlier that afternoon. I kept hearing the usual noises, doors shifting slightly from air pressure, distant thuds when the heater kicked on. But then something caught my attention. Around 9:30, I was in the far corner of the building, scanning a batch of boxes, when I heard a sharp click behind me. I turned, expecting to see a motion light or maybe a loose pallet falling over. Nothing, just rows of shelves and silence. I shrugged it off. Concrete buildings like that always have weird acoustics. I went back to work. About 20 minutes later, I was walking past Dock 3 when I saw something strange. One of the dock locks, these big mechanical clamps that hold trailers in place, had changed status. It was showing green, which meant unlocked, but I knew for a fact all 4 docks had been locked when I did my first walkthrough. I stepped outside to double-check. There was no trailer at Dock 3. The lock had somehow disengaged by itself. I stood there staring at it for a minute, trying to figure out if maybe I'd bumped a control switch or if it was just a glitch. I decided to relock it manually and moved on, telling myself not to overthink it. But from that point on, something felt off. I started hearing sounds. Dull, quick footsteps across the polished floor. Hushed shuffling near the stairwell. I'd pause the music and stand there holding my breath, but it would stop before I could pinpoint it. Then there was the tape gun. Every station had one, big, loud things we used to seal boxes. I kept mine on the table near the front. Around 11:15, I heard it being pulled, that rip sound of tape being yanked hard, followed by a clunk, like it was dropped. I was alone, and I hadn't touched the tape gun in over an hour. I walked back to the table. It was there, right where I left it, but the tape was hanging loose like someone had just used it. I even checked the CCTV feed from my phone. We had basic remote access through an app. Nothing showed up. No motion. No one near my workstation. I started to get that tight feeling in my chest. I wasn't panicking yet, but I was definitely alert now. My instincts were buzzing. Just after midnight, I went to the break room to heat up dinner. It's on the 2nd floor, above the loading area, and has windows overlooking the warehouse floor. I stood there with my microwave burrito, looking down at the rows of shelves and pallets, when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the emergency fire doors was open. Not wide open, just slightly ajar. It was the one near Dock 4. It leads to a stairwell that goes to the basement. It's supposed to stay locked unless there's a fire. I practically ran down the stairs and over to the door. Sure enough, the alarm bypass switch was turned. Somebody had unlocked it manually. I stood there for a long time, trying to convince myself it was some kind of malfunction or oversight. But the hairs on my neck were standing up. I opened the door and peered down the stairwell. It was pitch black. I could smell dust and cold concrete. My flashlight barely cut through it. There was nothing down there, just stairs and darkness. I closed the door and locked it myself. I pushed a pallet jack in front of it for good measure, and then I heard someone cough. It came from aisle 6. Short, muffled, and definitely human. I froze. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't the pipes or my audio. Someone was in the building. I turned off my music completely. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I slowly walked toward aisle 6, keeping to the edge of the shelves, trying not to make a sound. I peeked around the corner. No one. But the rolling ladder we used for top-shelf boxes was in the middle of the aisle, not parked like it normally is. Someone had moved it. I was done playing detective. I pulled out my phone and called my supervisor. No answer. I called the security company. They promised to dispatch someone immediately. Said they'd call me back in 5 minutes. Those were the longest 5 minutes of my life. I backed up slowly and made my way to the front office. It had a solid door with a lock, and I figured it was the safest place to wait. I locked it from the inside, turned off the lights, and crouched down under the desk, heart hammering in my chest. About 10 minutes passed. Then the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was walking through the warehouse. I could hear the squeak of boots on concrete, the soft clink of something metal. Keys, maybe? Then the steps stopped right outside the office door. They stood there for a full minute. Then I heard the door handle rattle. Not like someone trying to be quiet, someone trying to get in. They knew I was in there. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. After a moment, the handle stopped turning. Silence. Then I heard them walk away. I waited another 5 minutes, then cracked the door open a tiny bit. No one. But on the floor outside the office was something that hadn't been there earlier. A single black glove. Dirty. Torn. Like it had been dropped on purpose. That's when the security guard finally called me back. He said the patrol car had just pulled up and was going to do a sweep. I unlocked the office, stuck close to the wall, and walked quickly to the front entrance. The guard met me at the door. He checked the entire building, top to bottom. Nothing. No sign of forced entry. No one in the basement. Nothing missing. But I know what I heard. I know someone was in there. I didn't go back for a week. My supervisor understood and told me they'd be reviewing the camera footage in detail. When they did, they found something. At 10:58 p.m., right before I went to the break room, the camera in aisle 6 glitched out for 6 full minutes. When it came back online, the rolling ladder had been moved, but the footage showed no one moving it. They also found the fire door open for exactly 4 minutes. Then it closed on its own. The company replaced the locks, added more lighting, and started scheduling night shifts with 2 people minimum. But I never did another solo shift again. I still think about that black glove, and how whoever was there wanted me to know they were. Before we proceed, please let us know where you're from. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel and be a part of our small community. Let's continue. You'd think a locked office building in a good part of town would be the safest place to work late. That's what I always believed, until the night I stayed behind to finish some reports and realized I wasn't alone. What scared me most wasn't that someone else was in the building, but that they knew I was, and they didn't want me to leave. I used to work for a small marketing agency in downtown Indianapolis. It wasn't a fancy place, just a rented space on the 5th floor of a 6-story commercial building. There were a few other businesses on the floors below us, law firms, an architecture office, a dentist. The usual stuff. Our office was modern and open concept, with glass-walled meeting rooms and rows of desks, all facing a giant wall of windows. It always felt clean and professional. I was the junior account manager, which meant I handled client reports, tracked analytics, and did all the annoying behind-the-scenes tasks nobody else wanted to do. Deadlines were brutal. I stayed late at least 2 nights a week, just to keep up. Most of the time, I didn't mind. The office had a great view of the city lights at night, and I liked working when it was quiet. I'd put on some music, grab a soda from the fridge, and knock out hours of work with no distractions. But one night in October 2022, everything changed. It was a Thursday. The whole team had left around 6:30 after a long meeting. I decided to stay behind to finish a monthly report that was due the next morning. I figured I'd be done by 9:30 at the latest. By 7 p.m., I was the only person left on the floor. I remember feeling slightly uneasy as the sun went down. The office always felt a little too big when it was empty, but the lights were on, the HVAC hummed like always, and I was deep in a spreadsheet when something pulled me out of my focus. The motion-activated lights in the hallway flicked on. I froze. They're timed to stay off unless someone walks by. I waited, staring at the open door to the hallway that led to the restrooms and elevators. No one passed. I got up, walked into the hallway, and peeked around. Empty. I told myself it was probably a glitch, or maybe someone downstairs had walked up a floor and triggered the sensor. I went back to work. About 15 minutes later, I heard a soft knock. It came from the far side of the glass conference room, the one facing the hallway I'd just checked. 3 slow knocks. Not hard, just deliberate. I stood up, heart picking up speed. Again, no one was supposed to be there. All my coworkers had left, and the security guard downstairs always leaves at 7 o'clock. I walked over to the conference room slowly, trying to look casual, like I belonged there, in case someone was watching me. The hallway was empty. I pressed my face against the glass to look further down the corridor. Nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. You know that weird, heavy pressure you get between your shoulders when you feel eyes on you? That. Back at my desk, I started rushing through the rest of my work. That's when I heard the elevator ding. It's a very specific sound. A soft bell followed by the doors sliding open. I stood up, stared down the hall, and waited. No footsteps. No voices. Just the elevator opening, and then nothing. I grabbed my phone and checked the building app we use to track access logs. You needed a key card to enter the lobby after 6 p.m. The app showed no entries since I'd come in that morning. So how had the elevator moved? I started packing up my stuff. Screw the report. I could finish it early in the morning. As I grabbed my laptop, the conference room lights, which were also motion activated, turned on. I didn't even breathe. They only come on if someone's in there. I crept closer, holding my phone up like a weapon. I don't know what I expected to do with it. The room was empty, completely empty, but on the glass table was a sticky note, bright yellow, like the ones we always used. I walked in and picked it up. It said, in all caps, "You left your report." No name, no handwriting I recognized. I hadn't left my report anywhere. It was on my laptop. I looked around. I was sweating now. I walked toward the back supply room where the printer and office supplies were kept. It had no windows, just a small motion light. I flipped it on, and froze. The printer was running, spitting out page after page of what looked like blank paper. But when I stepped closer, I saw faint writing. Tiny gray text. The same sentence printed over and over. "You shouldn't be here." I turned around fast, expecting someone to be right behind me. But again, nothing. That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs outside the fire escape door. I bolted. I didn't even turn off my monitor. I grabbed my stuff, ran to the main hallway, and hit the elevator button over and over. I didn't care if whoever was messing with me was watching. I just wanted out. The elevator dinged. I jumped in, hit the ground floor, and waited for the doors to close. But right before they shut, I saw someone step into the hallway. A man, wearing a hoodie, head down, walking slow. He didn't even look up at me. The doors closed. I practically ran through the empty lobby and out to the parking garage. My car was the only one left on our floor. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there catching my breath. Just as I was about to start the engine, I saw movement in my rearview mirror. Someone had stepped into the garage. I killed the headlights and ducked. He walked slowly, right down the center of the lane. No urgency, just creeping forward. It was the same guy. Hoodie. Same slow walk. He didn't try to approach my car. He didn't even look at it. He just kept walking, past my row, down toward the stairwell. I waited a full 5 minutes before backing out and speeding home. I reported it the next day. Security reviewed the cameras, but the footage cut out between 6:52 and 10:04 p.m. All of it. Elevator cams, hallway cams, even the printer room. They had no explanation. No one else had signed into the building. The post-it note was gone when I went back with the building manager. Same with the printer pages. But I know what I saw, and I still don't know what scared me more, the guy himself, or the feeling that everything he did was planned. Like he was testing me, seeing what I'd do. I haven't worked late since, and I never, ever ignore motion lights anymore. Back in 2019, I worked security for a property management company that oversaw a handful of small office buildings just outside of Columbus, Ohio. My job was simple: patrol the buildings after hours, check the doors, scan a few QR checkpoints, and report any issues. Most nights were boring. Honestly, I liked it that way. I could listen to music, walk the empty halls, and sometimes even read a few chapters of a book between rounds. The buildings were never really scary. Just quiet. Each one had 3 to 5 floors, standard office layouts, and motion-activated lighting. They all had cameras too, but those were handled by a central system back at headquarters. My main job was just to be a visible presence and make sure no one was sneaking in or sleeping inside. I never once had a problem, until that one night in September, when I was covering Building 4 alone. It was a Friday, and the company was short-staffed. My usual route was split between 2 buildings, but my manager asked if I could cover Building 4 entirely since the other guard had called out. I didn't mind. It was the smallest property in the area, only 4 stories tall with a parking garage below. I'd done dozens of shifts there before and had never seen anything strange. I arrived around 10:45 p.m., parked in the underground garage, and started my first sweep. The building was dead silent. You get used to that sort of silence. The kind where the only thing you hear is the buzzing of fluorescent lights and the soft creak of ductwork as it settles. I walked the first 2 floors without issue, scanning the checkpoints with my phone and making notes. Everything was in place. No unlocked doors. No movement. It was around 12:20 a.m. when I first noticed something weird. I was on the 3rd floor, passing through the main hallway, when I saw that one of the office chairs at the far end was turned toward the hallway. Not tucked under the desk, just facing out, like someone had been sitting there watching the hallway, and then left. At first, I assumed maybe a cleaner or late worker had forgotten to push it back in, but I didn't remember seeing it like that on my first round. I stepped into the office to check. The computer was off, desk was clean, no personal items, totally unused. Still, I chalked it up to memory and moved on. But 30 minutes later, when I came back down the same hallway, the chair was turned again. Only this time, it was facing the wall. I stopped. Now, this wasn't a spinning office chair. It was heavy, old, with wooden legs and armrests. The kind you had to manually pick up or turn by hand. No draft could have moved it, and no one else was in the building. Or so I thought. At that point, I was uncomfortable but not panicked. I checked every room on the 3rd floor, one by one. Nothing. Totally empty. The cameras in the security tablet app only showed static frames unless motion was detected, and nothing had pinged. I messaged my supervisor a quick update, joking that someone's got a prank ghost up here, and went back to the lobby. That's when the elevator doors opened on their own. No chime. No call button pressed. Just a soft ding and a slow open. I stepped back, expecting someone to walk out. No one did. I waited a few seconds, then looked inside. Empty, but the 4 button was lit up. Someone, or something, had called the elevator from the top floor. I took the stairs. I wasn't scared, just cautious. I wanted to make sure no one had gotten into the building without my knowledge. The top floor was mostly empty suites, a tax firm, a travel agency, and 2 vacant offices waiting to be rented out. Most of the lights were off, but the hallway motion sensor triggered as I stepped into the corridor. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Just a few. Quick. Light. Coming from the far end, past the break room. I moved fast. Flashlight in one hand, radio in the other. But again, nothing. Just silence and stale air. I did a sweep of every room up there. Even the storage closets. Everything was locked or empty. Except the break room. On the table was a cup. Styrofoam. Still warm. And next to it, a packet of instant coffee. Open. Used. Stir stick beside it. I swear to you, it hadn't been there 20 minutes earlier. That was the moment I knew. Someone was in the building. Someone watching me. I locked the stairwell door on the 4th floor and radioed HQ. They told me to stay put and wait for police backup, just in case it was a squatter or someone dangerous. I stayed by the door trying to stay calm, but the silence made it worse. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, but faster this time, running, down the stairs, toward me. I backed away from the stairwell door, flashlight aimed, ready to bolt. But the door never opened. I waited. Nothing. After a few minutes, I started to think maybe I imagined it. Then my radio crackled. But it wasn't dispatch. It was just static, followed by a man's voice. Very faint. Just one word. Run. That was it. I dropped the radio and sprinted down the hallway, took the other stairwell to the 2nd floor, and made it back to the garage. I jumped in my car, locked the doors, and sat there with my phone clutched to my chest. Police arrived about 10 minutes later. They searched the building top to bottom. No one was found. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints on the cup. No cameras triggered. Nothing. I filed the report, but I couldn't explain it. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. But there was no proof. The official response was that maybe someone accessed the building before 10 p.m. and hid out. But they never found any trace of that person. What really bothered me came 2 weeks later. I was back at the same property, this time during a morning shift to oversee some contractors. One of the building maintenance guys pulled me aside and asked if I'd seen anything strange recently. I hesitated but nodded. He told me that 2 years earlier, before I started the job, a former tenant on the 4th floor, a guy who ran a small digital marketing firm, had a breakdown. Came into the office late one night, didn't leave until the next morning. He was found in the break room, drinking cup after cup of coffee, talking to himself. He claimed someone had been following him through the building. They fired him a week later. Apparently, he said the exact same thing I did, that the footsteps weren't loud, that the elevator opened on its own, that someone told him to run. He was eventually hospitalized. Nobody had mentioned that to me before. I guess they didn't want to scare the new guy. Needless to say, I stopped working night shifts after that. And to this day, I keep thinking, what if that guy wasn't crazy? What if someone really was following him? And now they've just moved on to the next one. You don't expect anything weird to happen while stocking cereal and mopping up aisle spills. Especially not when the store's closed and locked for the night. But one shift last winter, I heard someone speaking over the store intercom. The thing is, no one was supposed to be using it. And what they said wasn't just weird, it was personal. In 2022, I worked the late shift at a 24-hour superstore in a small town outside Tulsa. We technically stayed open all night, but starting at midnight, we locked the front doors and switched to restock and reset mode. Only employees were allowed in, unless we were finishing up with a straggler. We had a routine. One cashier stayed at the front for returns, and a handful of us worked the floor, pulling pallets and stocking shelves. That night, it was just me, Ashley up at the front register, and 2 stockers in the back unloading a truck. The manager had left early, and the cameras were on auto record. It wasn't unusual to have a skeleton crew on quiet nights. It was supposed to be one of those nights. Nothing major. I had 3 aisles to restock, breakfast foods, snacks, and canned goods. Pretty standard. I put in my earbuds, got into the zone, and got to work. Around 1:30 a.m., I was knee-deep in cereal boxes when the store went quiet, like noticeably quiet. Usually, even when you're alone in an aisle, you can hear the faint sound of wheels rolling, muffled music, or a pallet jack being dragged across the backroom floor. But this time, there was nothing. Just the buzz of overhead lights and the occasional distant clink of metal shelving settling. I took out one earbud just to check. Still quiet. Then the intercom crackled to life. Not the music, the actual PA system. It was a low, static-filled whisper. Then someone cleared their throat, close to the mic, too close. Then this voice, slow, calm male, said, "Aisle 12. That's where he is." I froze. I was in aisle 12. I looked around fast, thinking maybe Ashley or one of the guys was messing with me. But no one else was nearby. And the intercom in the break room was behind a locked door. You needed a key to get in. I grabbed my walkie and radioed Ashley. "Hey, did you hear that?" I asked. "What?" she replied. She sounded distracted, maybe half asleep. "The intercom just came on," I said. "Someone said aisle 12. That's where he is." "You didn't touch the mic?" "No," she said. "I've been at the front the whole time." I asked her to check the office in case someone from the back snuck in there. "Okay, give me a sec," she said. I waited, heart pounding. A minute passed. Then she came back on. Office doors still locked. "No one's in there." I forced a laugh, trying to play it cool. Weird, but it didn't feel funny, because that voice had known exactly where I was. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of carts rolling on the far side of the store. It wasn't unusual, but the rhythm was off. Not smooth like someone pushing a cart, more like drag, pause, drag. I peeked around the corner. Nothing. But the cereal I had just finished stocking? Several boxes were on the floor, neatly lined up, like someone had placed them there intentionally. I stood there, confused. I had just stacked those. I would have heard them fall. Then the intercom came on again. Same voice. But this time it didn't speak, it just breathed. Slow, shallow breaths. Maybe 10 seconds worth. Then it cut off. I turned and walked fast toward the break room. I wanted to check the door myself. Still locked. Then I heard something that made me stop cold. Whistling. Not a song, just 3 slow notes, like someone testing their breath. Coming from the back room where the loading dock was. I walked toward the dock. No one was there, but the chain on the emergency exit was swinging, like it had just been touched. I called over the radio again. "Ashley, you sure no one else is here?" She responded immediately. "Yeah." "Why? No one's gone out the back door?" I asked. "Nope. Truck crews on break. I just saw them." "So who had been whistling?" I didn't know what else to do, so I headed toward the front of the store, walking fast. I figured if something else happened, I'd just sit up by Ashley until morning. As I passed the clothing section, I noticed something weird. One of the changing room curtains was half open. Now, we closed those after hours. I stepped closer and saw a pair of shoes poking out beneath the curtain. Men's boots. Muddy. Someone was standing inside, facing out, watching. I backed away slowly, grabbed my walkie, and whispered, "Ashley, I think someone's here." By the changing rooms. Tall guy. Boots. No reply. "Ashley?" Nothing. I turned and sprinted to the front register. She wasn't there. The chair behind the counter was empty. The lights above the register were still on. Her phone was there, screen cracked, and the receipt printer was blinking like someone had used it. I called again. Still no answer. Then the PA system came on one last time. This time, the voice didn't whisper. It laughed. And then it said, "Too late." I ran out through the emergency exit, straight into the parking lot. Didn't even clock out. I called 911 from my car. Police showed up and did a sweep of the store. They found Ashley, locked inside the women's bathroom. Scared and shaken. Said someone in a ski mask had grabbed her from behind while she was heading to the front office. She fought him off, ran, and hid. She couldn't reach her radio. The backdoor camera? Cut out at 1:26 a.m. Just static. For 8 minutes. No one was caught. No prints. Nothing on the playback from the PA system. No record of who used it. Corporate said it must have been a malfunction. But Ashley never came back to work. Neither did I. And a few months later, we heard a rumor from a former employee that a guy who used to work night stock was fired in 2021 for stalking a cashier. Apparently, he still had a spare set of keys. To this day, I don't go near that store after dark. And if I ever hear an intercom click on by itself again, I'm not sticking around to hear what comes next. Most people think working the front desk at a hotel is boring. And it usually is, especially at night. You check a few people in, print some receipts, refill the coffee station, and fight to stay awake until sunrise. That's how I treated the job for over a year. Until the night I realized one of our guests had checked in under 6 different names over the span of 3 months, always asking for the same room. Back in 2022, I worked as a night auditor at a mid-range business hotel just outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. It was a quiet place. 40 rooms, mostly business travelers, a few families passing through on their way to the Grand Canyon. The lobby was small, a front desk, some armchairs, and one of those free coffee stations with powdered creamer and stale cookies. I worked alone most nights from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I didn't mind it. It was peaceful. I had a routine: run the night reports, answer the occasional phone call, maybe watch a show on my phone when the boss wasn't around. The only weird thing about the job was room 209. It wasn't haunted or anything, but over the course of 3 months, I started noticing a pattern. Every week or so, someone would book it specifically, online, never by phone, and always under a different name. Different card, different ID, but always room 209. At first, I assumed it was just coincidence. Some people like corner rooms or certain floors, but these guests, they never made eye contact. They never asked for anything, and they always checked in late and checked out before sunrise. The first few times, I didn't think much of it. People travel weird sometimes. Maybe they just liked that room. But over time, I started seeing little things that didn't add up. One guy checked in under the name Robert L. He wore a baseball cap and glasses, never took them off. Paid with a prepaid card. 2 weeks later, a Marcus T. booked the same room. Same height. Same voice. Same habit of wearing a baseball cap and avoiding eye contact. Then Daniel G. A week after that, different ID, but the same signature on the registration form. I know I should have flagged it, but hotels get weird guests all the time. My manager had a rule: as long as they pay and don't trash the room, leave MB. Then I noticed something else. Each time room 209 was booked by this guest, they requested no housekeeping. Not just the do not disturb sign, they explicitly asked for a full privacy block, meaning no one could enter the room, even if we suspected damage. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I got a call from room 209. The voice on the line was calm. Male. He asked if there were any guests in the room directly above him, room 309. I checked. It was vacant. He paused and said, "I think someone's walking around up there. Heavy boots. I can't sleep." I apologized and told him the room was empty. "Could you go check?" he asked. "Maybe someone broke in." I told him I'd walk up and take a look. The moment I ended the call, I got a weird feeling. Not fear exactly, but that sort of tightening in your chest when something feels off. I went up the back stairs and walked into 309. Empty. Clean. Quiet. I paced around for a second to make some noise and show I checked, then returned to the front desk. I called 209 to let him know. "No one's up there," I said. There was silence. Then he asked, "Are you sure?" I paused. "Yes, sir." Click. He hung up. I didn't hear from him the rest of the night. It all came to a head one night in March. A guest named Anthony K. booked room 209 online. Prepaid. Arrived just after 11:20 p.m. ball cap, dark hoodie, backpack slung low. I'd seen the routine a dozen times by now. I greeted him politely. He gave me a nod, didn't speak, and signed the check-in form. Same handwriting. Same signature. As he went up to his room, I pulled out the previous guest files from our back drawer. I compared Anthony K. to Robert L. and Daniel G. The signature was identical. Identical, every stroke, every loop. Like it had been photocopied. My hands started to shake. I logged into the back end of our booking system and pulled up security footage. I looked at each night he had checked in under a different name. Same guy. Always around the same time. Always with a backpack. I zoomed in on the footage. The backpack was the same too. I was halfway through printing screenshots when I heard a sound. The front door. It had opened. He was standing there, Anthony K. Outside in the dark, staring at me through the glass. But he had already checked in. He had already gone upstairs. My stomach dropped. He looked at me for a long time, just standing there watching. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot. Heart pounding, I ran to check the system. Room 209 had accessed the Wi-Fi. He was in the room. I reviewed the footage again. The time he walked through the lobby, and the time he checked in, 5 minutes apart. Either someone else had walked into room 209, or the man who checked in had never gone there at all. The police arrived within 20 minutes. I told them everything about the aliases, the matching IDs, the backpack, the request for room 209 every time. They went up to the room and knocked. No answer. They opened it with a master key. Room 209 was empty. Neatly made bed. Lights off. No sign anyone had even sat down. But the backpack was there. Inside they found burner phones, SIM cards, receipts from out-of-state motels, and a stack of printed reservation confirmations. All for our hotel, all for room 209, all under different names. There were even photos, blurry low-angle shots, of me behind the desk. Dozens of them. Some taken from outside, some from the lobby. But one chilled me more than anything else. A printed photo of me sleeping on the lobby couch. It had been taken from just a few feet away. I don't even remember falling asleep that night. The police launched a full investigation, but the man was never found. The IDs were fake. The credit cards prepaid. The backpack had no fingerprints. No traceable information. We handed over the footage, but they couldn't make sense of the timing or how the same person appeared in two places at once. Some officers believed he had an accomplice. Others thought he was just using a remote-controlled camera setup. But to this day, no one knows why he kept booking room 209, or why he was watching me. After that night, I quit. I couldn't walk into that building without feeling his eyes on me. Sometimes, when I'm at a gas station or in line at a store, I still catch glimpses of people who look like him. Hat pulled low, hoodie up, backpack slung over one shoulder. And every time I check into a hotel now, no matter where I am, I check the peephole before I sleep. And I never stay in room 209. Ever again. Back in 2022, I worked part-time for a local history museum in a small Pennsylvania town. It wasn't a flashy place. No dinosaur bones or Egyptian mummies. Just old newspaper clippings, Civil War artifacts, railroad blueprints, and dusty exhibits about the town's industrial past. I was hired as a digital archivist to scan and catalog hundreds of old files from storage. Photographs, letters, land deeds, things like that. Most of the work was done in the archive room, located in the basement beneath the museum floor. The archive room was basically a long concrete box. No windows, one heavy door, and rows of shelves stacked with boxes older than my grandparents. It had a faint smell of paper, dust, and something metallic that never quite went away. The museum closed at 6 p.m. each night, but the director gave me access to work after hours when needed. On Thursday nights, I'd stay late by myself, sometimes until midnight. The alarm system was off during my shift, and I had the only key card to enter. I liked being alone with my music and my coffee, until the night I learned that I wasn't really alone. It was late November when it happened. Cold air slipped through the building's old brick walls, and I remember the floor being colder than usual that night. I arrived around 6:15 p.m. after the staff had left and brought down 2 boxes from the storage cage labeled Railroad, 1893 to 1902. I remember that specifically because the handwriting on the label was hard to read, and I almost thought it said ritual. That little misunderstanding felt funny at the time. It wouldn't later. I had just finished scanning a stack of faded train route maps when I realized I'd left my phone charging upstairs on the front desk. The archive room was always locked from the outside, so I used a heavy wooden doorstop to keep it open while I ran up to grab it. The museum was dark and empty, just how I liked it. The click of my boots echoed as I crossed the hardwood floors of the exhibit hall, past glass cases of old mining tools and faded uniforms. I picked up my phone, checked the time, 7:38 p.m., and started heading back down. When I reached the basement, the archive door was closed. That was strange. I had wedged it open like I always did. The door wasn't heavy enough to fall shut on its own. At least, it never had before. I assumed maybe I hadn't wedged it correctly. I sighed and pushed it open. The light inside was still on, my thermos still sitting on the scanner table. Everything seemed untouched. But when I reached the desk, I saw something that hadn't been there before. A single sheet of paper sat next to the scanner. It was a printed staff photo, the kind taken at employee parties or fundraisers, black and white, clearly from years ago. About a dozen people in button-downs and name tags stood in front of the museum's entrance. One man's face was circled in red pen. He stood off to the side, slightly apart from the others, wearing a maintenance uniform. I didn't recognize him, but someone had placed this photo there. I hadn't printed it, and I hadn't brought any photo paper down with me. I felt a chill crawl up the back of my neck. I looked around slowly. The archive room was still, silent, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been, or still was, watching me. I walked to the archive door again and pulled on the handle. Locked. My heart thumped once hard. I pulled again. The door didn't budge. It only locked from the outside. I knocked, called out, "Hello? Is someone here?" Nothing. I tried my phone. No signal. I waved it around, stepped to different corners of the room. Nothing. Concrete and steel don't care how badly you want a bar of service. I sat back at the desk, trying to think. I hadn't heard footsteps, no creaking, no breathing. But that paper, that photo, hadn't printed itself. Someone had been in here. That's when I noticed the scanner again. It had turned itself back on, and on the screen was the same staff photo. Only now there were 2 red circles. The second one was drawn over my face. I shoved my chair back, heart racing, every muscle tense. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't something I had overlooked or misremembered. Someone was here, and they wanted me to know they were watching. That they had been watching. I tried the door again. Nothing. I pounded on it hard until my knuckles hurt. No answer. I pressed my ear to the metal, trying to hear something, anything. That's when I caught it. A breath. Just one. Shallow. Right on the other side of the door. I froze. And then a shadow passed across the gap under the door. Not fast. Slow. Deliberate. As if someone was standing just inches from the threshold. I backed away. I scanned the shelves, looking for anything heavy, anything I could use. I grabbed an old wooden paper trimmer and held it in front of me like a club. Then the lights cut out. I stood alone in the dark, the red LED on the scanner glowing like an eye. I listened. Nothing. Then came the click of the door unlatching. It swung open, but no one stood there. The hallway beyond was pitch black, but I could hear them. Slow footsteps, not coming in, but moving away. Down the hall. Toward the stairwell. They wanted me to follow. I didn't. I shut the door again and used the same trimmer to wedge it shut. Then I turned off the scanner, killed the lights, and sat against the wall, holding my breath for the next 4 hours. When I opened my eyes, morning light was trickling through the hallway. The building opened at 9 a.m., and I heard the receptionist coming in. I yelled for help. She opened the archive room from the outside and looked confused. "Did you sleep in here?" I didn't answer her right away. I was too shaken. I just grabbed my phone and left. That afternoon, I met with the museum director and told him everything. He listened quietly. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a small stack of papers. Old visitor reports, complaints, staff notes. He showed me 3 incidents from years prior. Employees reporting noises in the basement. Footsteps. Doors locking by themselves. One of them described seeing a man in a janitor's uniform walking through the building after hours. A man who had been terminated 5 years earlier for using his keys after being let go. But here's what really bothered me. That man, the one who had been fired, was the same one in the staff photo I'd found. And according to building access logs, no one had scanned in or out of the museum the night I was there. The only name on record was mine. The director offered to let me take a week off. I never went back. That scanner, the one that had turned itself on, had saved its last document. I checked the digital folder on the archive computer before I left. It had one file, the photo with the 2 red circles. Except now there was a third face circled in red. I couldn't tell who it was, but it was in the background of the photo, just barely visible. A figure standing in the shadows, watching the group from the museum's entrance. I printed it once, deleted the file, and walked out of the building. And I haven't stepped into a museum since. In 2021, I worked overnight shifts at a 24-hour fast food chain in a small Ohio town. We were right off the interstate, surrounded by gas stations and a truck stop, so the drive-thru stayed open all night, but the lobby was closed after 11. Most nights it was just me and one other crew member, usually a line cook or a manager doing paperwork in the back. But that night, I was completely alone. The manager had called off, and no one else could cover. Corporate policy allowed one person on shift, as long as the drive-thru stayed locked and the cameras were active. It wasn't ideal, but I'd done it a few times before. It was a cold Friday night in late October. Business had slowed after midnight. A couple of truckers, one DoorDash pickup, and then nothing for almost an hour. I remember texting my friend around 2:40, saying how quiet it was. I was wiping down the counters, restocking the sauces, and waiting for the fryer timer to go off when I saw headlights pull into the empty parking lot. The car didn't go through the drive-thru. It just idled outside the main entrance. A minute later, a guy in a hoodie got out with a large brown paper bag and walked up to the front doors. He knocked softly on the glass. At first, I thought he was just confused. Maybe he didn't realize the lobby was closed. I walked over to the door and signaled, "Drive-thru only," by pointing to the headset. But instead of leaving, he held up the bag and said, "Uber Eats, order for Sarah." That stopped me cold. I hadn't placed any orders, and I was the only one there. I told him that and S my head. "Wrong store," I mouthed through the glass. He frowned, looked down at his phone, then showed me the screen. The app clearly listed our address and an order placed 12 minutes ago: 2 cheeseburgers, fries, and a milkshake. Under the customer name, it said Sarah M. That's my full name. He double-checked and asked again if I wanted it. I told him no, I hadn't ordered anything. He gave a weird little shrug and said, "All right," then walked back to his car. I stood there for a few seconds, heart picking up a little. It had to be a mistake, right? Maybe someone with the same name. Maybe a prank. But the odds of that happening with my full name and our exact location? I went to the register and checked the order log. No mobile order, no in-store ticket, nothing. I pulled out my phone and checked my delivery apps. No outgoing orders. No alerts. Nothing. That's when the second car pulled in. Same deal. Different driver, different car, but again walked up with a delivery bag and knocked on the glass. "Grubhub," she said. "Order for Sarah." I didn't even open the door. I just yelled through the glass, "No one here ordered that." She blinked, confused, and then showed me her phone. This one was for a breakfast sandwich and orange juice. Placed 8 minutes after the first one. Same name. Same store address. I asked to see the phone through the glass, and she pressed it up. There was a note attached to the order. "Make sure she sees you." I backed away. She tilted her head, like maybe she was annoyed or confused, then walked back to her car. I turned the lock on the front door, even though I knew it was already shut. Something about that note didn't sit right. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. One text message. It said, "You forgot the milkshake." No number. No contact info. Just the message. I turned off the fryer and the line equipment and went to the office in the back. I shut the door and locked it, heart now racing. I checked the security cameras on the monitor, front lot, drive-through, side door. Nothing. Both cars had left. I sat down in the chair and stared at the screen for a long time. And then a third car pulled in. The third delivery driver didn't knock. He didn't say anything. He got out of a black Honda Civic and just stood by the front doors, holding a bag in one hand and his phone in the other. I zoomed in on the camera feed. He wasn't wearing a delivery jacket or lanyard, just plain clothes, dark hoodie, hands in his pockets now. And he was looking straight at the camera, like he knew where it was. He slowly held up his phone and tapped the screen. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another message. "Come get your food, Sarah." I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I waited, staring at the monitor. The man didn't knock. Didn't speak. He just stood there. Then he bent down and placed the delivery bag right against the front door, stood back up, and walked to his car. Except this time, he didn't drive away. He turned off his headlights and waited. I got up and crept down the hall to peek at the front entrance from the corner. His car was still there. I waited 10 minutes, then 20. He didn't move. The bag was still outside. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? A guy dropped off food I didn't order and won't leave. Then the final message came through. It just said, "Blue shirt. Black hat. You look better in red." That's what I was wearing. I lost it. I grabbed the office phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher was calm. Took my report. Promised someone would come. I stayed in the locked office, watching the camera. The car was still there. 6 minutes later, I saw red and blue lights roll into the lot. The car peeled out before they even parked. Gone in seconds. The officers took my statement. I showed them the messages, the screenshots from the delivery apps, and the order receipts that the drivers had shown me. None of them traced back to a registered account. The orders had all been placed using prepaid gift cards, digital ones. No names, no verified accounts, just disposable logins. When we pulled the security footage from earlier, one of the officers asked me a strange question. Do you always leave your Instagram handle on your name tag? I was confused, then remembered I'd written it there as a joke the week before. We'd had a bunch of college students come in, and I thought it was funny. I forgot to take it off. That's where they think he got my name. He'd seen me at work. Maybe followed me. Maybe watched me from the parking lot for days. Maybe even placed real orders through Uber Eats or DoorDash and never picked them up, just to see how I moved. That was my last overnight shift. The next week, I asked for mornings only. I deleted every food delivery app on my phone, changed my number, locked my social media, got a new badge, no name, no joke. I still think about those drivers. They were just doing their jobs, but someone out there used them to send a message, to test how far they could get. And I still wonder what would have happened if I had opened the door. Back in 2017, I worked at a third-party call center for a tech company that handled customer service for small electronics. Think routers, earbuds, Bluetooth speakers, low-ticket items. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than most night jobs in my area, and I liked the independence. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. 4 nights a week. Most of the building was empty by 8:30. A few other reps worked upstairs or across the floor, but I was often by myself in our section. Our office was typical corporate: gray carpeting, pale blue cubicle walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, and endless rows of desks. During the day it was packed and loud. At night it felt hollow and strange. You could hear every little noise, your typing, your chair squeaking, even the HVAC turning on. We had a central desk with a supervisor's terminal and a big whiteboard where agents tracked call volume manually. I usually brought a hoodie, a big thermos of coffee, and headphones to keep myself sane. Most of my job was either transferring customers or logging complaints, nothing intense. But one Thursday night in September, I got a call that changed everything. The shift had started off normally. A couple of billing questions, 2 warranty requests, and one angry guy who thought his speaker was possessed because it kept pairing with someone else's phone. Standard stuff. Around 2:15 a.m., I took a break, stretched, walked the perimeter of the floor to wake myself up. I could hear typing from one of the upstairs departments, so I wasn't completely alone, but I didn't see anyone in my wing. I got back to my desk, logged in, and waited for the next call. At exactly 2:33 a.m., my phone rang. I answered like I always do. Thank you for calling SecureCom support. This is Sarah speaking. How can I help you? There was silence for about 2 seconds, then a man's voice replied, Hey Sarah, how's the coffee tonight? I froze. The voice was calm. Male. Maybe 30s. No background noise. Just that sentence. I stuttered a bit. I'm sorry, did you need help with the device? He chuckled, soft and low. No, I'm good. Just checking in. Then he hung up. No name on the caller ID. No record in our system. No ticket generated. I stared at the monitor, confused, heart beating faster than it should have been. Maybe it was someone pranking the support line. That had happened before, but usually it was obvious. Kids giggling or people yelling nonsense. This felt different. Targeted. I tried to shake it off. But 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same voice. Your sweater's slipping off your shoulder. You always get like that when you're tired. I spun around in my chair, scanning the office. No one was there. I was wearing a blue zip-up hoodie. I'd tugged it down earlier without thinking. No one could have seen that unless they were watching me. And the only camera in the room was behind me, facing my monitor. I hit the mute key, stood up, and walked a few steps toward the main hallway. I whispered into the receiver, Who is this? You look nervous, the voice replied. Don't be. Then the line went dead. I checked the terminal. Still no record of an incoming call. It was like it had bypassed the system entirely. My fingers trembled on the keyboard as I typed a note to the building admin through our Slack channel. No one responded. At 3:07 a.m., the phone rang again. I let it ring twice before answering. This time, he said, Turn around. I didn't. I hung up, grabbed my phone, and called our site supervisor's personal number. It went to voicemail. I texted, "Urgent. Getting weird calls. I think someone's in the building." No reply. I started to wonder if I was imagining it, sleep deprivation, nerves, too much caffeine, until I saw the message. Printed on the whiteboard near the supervisor desk, in small black marker, was a single sentence I hadn't written. "You're the only one left." I backed up toward the far end of the cubicle row, my eyes scanning every corner. The whiteboard had been clean earlier. I'd wiped it myself before the shift started. There was no reason anyone else would have touched it. I grabbed a stapler off my desk, not much, but something to hold. The overhead lights flickered. Once, twice, then stayed dimmed. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. One new message. Look behind the paper tray. I turned toward the printer near the back wall. One of those big industrial units no one used after hours. I walked toward it slowly, breath shallow, heart thumping. Behind the paper tray, wedged between the machine and the cubicle divider, was a disposable coffee cup. From the same local cafe I'd stopped at before my shift. My name was written on it in Sharpie, just like they always did. But below it, in different handwriting, someone had added, "I liked our talk." I staggered backward. That coffee had been with me when I walked in. No one else touched it. It hadn't left my side, unless someone had followed me, into the parking lot, or into the building. And then I remembered, when I arrived, the side entrance lock had clicked slower than usual. I thought it was just the scanner being buggy again. But what if someone had slipped in behind me? What if they never left? The lights flickered again, and then every phone on the floor, the entire row of cubicles, began to ring, one after another. I turned and ran. I left everything behind, my headset, my coffee, my bag. I ran straight out the main doors and into the parking lot. My car was the only one there. I locked the doors and drove away, without even checking the rearview mirror. The next morning, I reported everything to my supervisor. She checked the system logs. According to the records, my phone had only received 3 legitimate customer calls all night. None of them were male. None of them had connected for more than 90 seconds. The whiteboard? Wiped clean. The coffee cup? Gone. No video footage either. The hallway cameras had glitched between 2:30 and 3:45 a.m. Black screen the whole time. IT claimed it was a power cycle issue. They told me not to worry. I took the weekend off. Then I quit. A few months later, I got a text from an old coworker who still worked night shifts. She said someone had left a note on her cubicle. No name, no writing, just a screenshot of her live webcam feed, taken from behind her chair. She didn't know where it came from. She asked if I thought it was connected to what happened to me. I told her yes, and I told her not to go back, because I don't know if it was someone playing a sick game, or someone testing what they could get away with. But I'm sure of one thing. They work there, and they only show themselves when you're alone. I was working overnight inventory at a 24-hour Walmart in northern Michigan. I was 24 years old, had dropped out of school a year prior, and was just trying to make ends meet. I didn't mind the night shifts. They were usually quiet. No screaming kids, no long lines, no supervisors breathing down your neck. It was just me and a couple of other associates stocking shelves, restocking pallets, and cleaning up the chaos from the day shift. The building itself was massive, like all Walmarts, with cameras in every corner and long, echoey aisles that always felt a little too empty after midnight. The store had technically switched to close to public hours from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. due to staffing shortages, which meant our job was just to prepare for the next day. The only people supposed to be inside were employees. I had done dozens of these shifts before and never had an issue. Until one night, when I was assigned to work alone in the back of the store, in the garden section. And I started to notice signs that someone else was there, someone who was never supposed to be inside. It was a Friday night, snowing hard outside. A manager had called in, and one of our crew left early after a migraine. That left just 3 of us in the store. James up front doing backroom pulls, Leanne in electronics, and me restocking seasonal items in garden. The garden center was always a weird part of the building. Even in winter, they kept part of it open, mostly for storing leftover inventory and lawn tools. The main floor lights stayed off unless triggered by motion sensors, and the roll-up gate to the outside was locked tight. I set up near the middle aisle with a couple of U-boats full of fake plants and clearance items. I had my earbuds in, one out for safety, and got into a rhythm. Every so often I'd hear the buzz of the intercom or a cart squeaking in the distance, but otherwise it was peaceful. Still, I kept getting this uneasy feeling like I wasn't totally alone. It started small. First, I heard a faint sound behind me, like plastic shifting. I turned and saw one of the patio chair boxes had fallen over. No big deal. I figured I'd bumped it earlier, and it slid down. I stood it back up and moved on. About 15 minutes later, I walked past the corner shelf and saw one of the heavy-duty bolt cutters had been taken off its. It was lying neatly on the floor, parallel to the shelf. Clean. No dust. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I had restocked that section yet. I hadn't, and I was the only one assigned to garden. I picked it up slowly, set it back on the, and made a mental note to ask if James or Leanne had been through that aisle. That's when I noticed something worse. The chain lock on the emergency exit door had been clipped. Not removed. Just snipped once, like someone had tested it, then decided to leave it hanging, slightly broken. My stomach dropped. That chain had been perfectly fine earlier. I texted James. "Did you come through garden earlier?" He replied, "Nope. Haven't left back room." I texted Leanne too. No response. I started walking toward the front of the garden center, where the small break table was set up. That's when I heard it, a soft, slow dragging sound, like shoes across concrete, coming from the aisle I had just left. I turned around. No one there. But one of the fake plant displays, a big 6-foot-tall one, was now shifted about 2 feet into the walkway. That thing was heavy, on a rolling base. I hadn't moved it. I wasn't even near it. Suddenly, the light above the next aisle flicked on. Motion sensor. But I was the only one in that section. Unless, I didn't finish the thought. I turned and started fast walking toward the employee entrance that led to the main floor. As I passed the break table, I noticed something on it I hadn't seen before. A receipt, dated 2 days earlier. On it was one item, bolt cutters. I grabbed the receipt, heart pounding, and ran straight to the employee hallway. I radioed James. My voice cracked a little. "Hey James, anyone report someone entering through the garden exit this week?" He came back after a second. "Nope." "Why?" "There's a snip lock back here, and someone's been moving stuff. I think someone's in the building." He went silent, then said, "I'll call the manager on call. Lock the hallway doors if you can." I did. I ducked into the employee stockroom behind the garden section and locked the steel door. It was meant to stay open during hours, but I remembered the keypad override and used it. I sat there breathing hard, trying not to panic. Then I heard the garden doors creak. The automatic ones. The ones that only open from the inside. I checked the camera feed on the hallway monitor. We had one that pointed at the garden exit, even though it was grainy. I watched someone, a man, walk across the camera, wearing a dark jacket, jeans, and a beanie. His head turned slightly toward the camera, but I couldn't see his face clearly. He wasn't sprinting. He was casually walking, like he'd been there all along, and knew exactly where to go. He moved off screen. Then nothing. I stayed in that locked room for 20 minutes before James and Leanne came back to get me, with the assistant manager now on speakerphone. When we walked out together, the garden center was empty. Quiet. But the fake plant display? It had been turned around, facing the entrance instead of the aisle. Like someone had wanted it to look at whoever was walking in. The police were called that night. We reviewed the footage. They saw the man too, but never saw him enter. No doors opened. No alarms were tripped. The timestamp on the clip. Corrupted. The bolt cutters? Still on the shelf, untouched. But the receipt I found? Gone. Completely disappeared between me calling James and the officers arriving. They searched the store. Every aisle. Every back room. Nothing. No sign of a break-in. No footprints in the snow outside the garden center. The snip chain on the door? Management said it could have been damaged during unloading. No report was ever filed. Just an internal safety warning. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. A few days later, during another late shift, I ran into one of the older overnight workers from a different store nearby. He pulled me aside and asked, Hey, you ever see someone walking around garden at night? Wears a beanie? Doesn't talk? I just stared at him. He said, "Yeah, we had that happen last year too. Manager found footprints inside, but the doors were locked from the inside. Never figured out how he got in." That was the last time I worked alone in that section. I still work nights sometimes, but only with a full crew, and only where I can see every entrance and exit. Because someone out there knows these buildings better than we do. And they're not coming in to steal. They're coming in to wait.